need to move this down just a smidgen. Smidgy widgeon. That's better. Hi friends, my name is Katie. Welcome back to my channel, Life Between Words. In preparation for middle grade March, Krista, Amanda, and I want to make sure that you are prepared to put together your TBR given our challenges. You don't have to follow these challenges. Read whatever middle grade book you want. That's all you have to do to participate. But for those of you looking for books to fulfill the challenges, we are each putting out a recommendations video filled with options for you. There probably will be some crossover, but if there is, and I know there is because we've kind of talked about what books we're each including on our recommendations videos, even though there will be a few overlaps between our recommendations, that just means it's a really good book. And if you haven't read it, you should. First, I guess I will go ahead and tell you the 5 challenges. All right, or the 5 prompts that we have. The first prompt is a book with a silhouette on the cover. The second prompt is a book with a strong family or found family. The third prompt is a book featuring a journey or adventure. The fourth prompt is a retelling or a book with a fairy tale vibe. And the fifth prompt is a book set in the decade you were born. There's a couple things that I want to mention before I start the recommendations. I'm not including the books that I have on my personal TBR for the month of March because we're also going to have another video in preparation. So if you want to know what I'm reading in March, just look out for that video. It will be up shortly. So yes, I'm not including those. I'm also only including books that I've read. There are plenty of books that I know about that fit these prompts that I haven't read, so I can't give my personal seal of approval. A lot of them are on just my long-term TBR, but you know, if you need more recommendations, please come find me on social media somewhere. Send me a message on Instagram. That's where I am more often than my YouTube direct messages. I would love to chat more if you're looking for books to read, and none of these sound good. But I hope that some of these books interest you because they are all great books. Okay, now let's get started. So, first prompt is a book with a silhouette on the cover. So I think I have talked about this book once. It's Fighting Words by Kimberly Brubaker Bradley. It does have a silhouette on the cover. This book is heavy. It's really serious. I'm going to scoot over just a smidge. It has many, many content warnings, so just be prepared going into it. It's wonderful, and it's handled so expertly, but I'm just letting you know, it's a hard read. It's about child abuse, child sexual abuse, to be more precise. But there's even more content warnings than that. If you want to know more about some of the content in this book, please reach out to me. But if you are open to reading books with themes like that, this book is handled just with so much finesse and grace and hope, and it's just really excellently done. It follows 10-year-old Della and her older sister Suki and their foster family situation, and it deals a lot with the situation that they came from. It also deals with friendship and bullying and just personal trauma. It's so, I've said it again, it's so good. But silhouette on the cover. Another book with a silhouette on the cover is Brown Girl Dreaming by Jacqueline Woodson. This is Jacqueline Woodson's memoir of her childhood. It's written in verse and it's very beautiful. Another book with a silhouette on the cover. There are so many middle grade books with silhouettes on the cover. I just kind of went overboard with my recommendations here. But Song for a Whale by Lynn Kelly. This is about a little girl who is deaf who hears about a whale. Blue 52, I think. I can't remember the name of the whale. Blue 55. Blue 55. A real whale whose vocalizations are at a different pitch, and it makes him very isolated from other whales. So she sort of finds a kinship with this whale, and she wants to figure out a way to communicate with him. It is a wonderful story, and there's a little silhouette of the main character, whose name is Iris, up there. finally, for a silhouette on the cover, is a book that we read as our group pick a couple years ago, and that's Sweep by Jonathan Auxier, or Auxier. I'm not actually sure how to pronounce his last name. This, and there's Nan and her little monster right there. This takes place in Victorian London, and it follows Nan, who is a chimney sweep, and her golem that she discovers one day. It is, oh, this is just such a good book. There's a little bit of magical realism, obviously, because of the golem in it, a soot monster, but it's just really beautiful, start to finish. The writing is gorgeous. The story is excellent. It's one of the best middle grade historical fiction books I think I've read. I just love it. It's one of my all-time favorites. So good. Moving on to our second prompt, we have a book that features a strong family or has a very strong family element. The first two, I feel like I would just be absolutely remiss if I didn't mention, and these ones I know are being mentioned by Krista. I think Amanda has some different ones for this prompt, but these are some of my favorites, and so I have to mention them. The Penderwicks by Jean Birdsall. This is a series of 5 books, and it follows the Penderwicks family. The subtitle of this first one is A Summer Tale of 4 Sisters, 2 Rabbits, and a Very Interesting Boy. This first book follows the 4 Penderwick sisters. 3 Penderwick sisters? No, 4 Penderwick sisters. It's right there in the title. 4 Penderwick sisters and their father, and their summer at sort of an estate called Arundel, and they sort of live on this estate, and they get to know the little boy who lives in the manor house, I guess. I'm not sure what you'd call it. And their adventures, and it's sweet and wholesome and heartwarming. It's a modern classic. So good. The second one that I want to recommend that features a very strong family element, or strong family, is along the same lines as the Penderwicks, but the first one was written just a few years ago. It's called The Vanderbeekers of 141st Street. I'm sure you've heard me talk about the Penderwicks and the Vanderbeekers before, or if not me, someone else. Both of these series are pretty popular if you are familiar with middle grade. This book follows the Vanderbeekers, who live in, I think they live in Harlem. And in this first book, their landlord, who comes across as very nasty, is evicting them from their very beloved townhouse in Harlem. And they go on a quest to try and keep their family from having to move out of the building. It's lovely. Once again, it's heartwarming. It feels like a classic. This family is so lovely. Unlike the Penderwicks, this is a family where both parents are intact. In the Penderwicks, their mother has died. In this book, they have both their parents. The other lovely thing about this book is it does bring a little bit of diversity into it, because I think their mother is maybe Asian American and their father is white, so there's that element to this book as well. It's so good. And last, I want to recommend a book that I read last March, during middle grade March, and that's Each Little Bird That Sings by Deborah Wiles. This follows a young girl named Comfort Snowburger, and her family owns a funeral home. This book deals a lot with grief, because in this book, Comfort has lost her great-great-aunt Florentine. And you would think that perhaps you wouldn't know your great-great-aunt very well, but that is not the case. This is a really close-knit family, and so family is a really strong element in this book, and it's just so wonderful. I highly recommend this book. It is one that kind of has gone under the radar. I have never heard anyone else talk about it. It is worth a read. It was a National Book Award finalist, so you don't have to just take my opinion for it in terms of its quality. The third prompt we have is a book that features a journey or an adventure. Another middle grade trope that is very common, and I mean, you could find a lot of books to fit this prompt. These are the ones that I'm recommending. I have talked about this book multiple times. It's one of my all-time favorite middle grade books. I reread it, I think 2 years ago now, and it held up so well. This was a favorite of mine when I was a kid, and I love it just as much now. It's Walk Two Moons by Sharon Creech. This book follows our main character, Salamanca Tree Hiddle. And she is going on a road trip with her grandparents in search of her mother. Her mother has been missing for years now, and she harbors a lot of resentment, but not just resentment, like hope that she's going to be able to find her mother. So she goes with her grandparents on a road trip to find her mom. It's heartbreaking, but it's also heartwarming. It's one of my favorite things in middle grade books is when there's that mixture of sadness and hope, that bittersweetness. It makes you cry, but it also makes you smile. This book has that feeling in spades. Oh, I love it so, so, so much. I can't say more good things about this book. Read it if you haven't, or reread it because it's worth a reread. Another favorite author, so I had to include at least one of her books, is The Miraculous Journey of Edward Tulane. I know I've talked about this book before. Kate DiCamillo, she's one of my favorites. I love her so. This book follows a China bunny named Edward, who is he's kind of mean and vain, and he's cold-hearted, and the little girl who owns him ends up losing him, and it's all of the families that he ends up with after that changes his heart. It's such a beautiful story, and the pictures in it are gorgeous. Not all middle grade books have illustrations. This one does. They're by Bagram Iba Tulane, and they are so beautiful. I'll just see if I can show you one. Oh, they're just stunning, stunning illustrations. So, yes, Miraculous Journey of Edward Tulane. Actually, there are several Kate DiCamillo books that I feel like would fit this challenge. The Tale of Despero is an amazing Kate DiCamillo book, and that's about an adventurous mouse. So that one would work too. Coyote Sunrise by Dan Gemeinhart. The Remarkable Journey of Coyote Sunrise, I should say. This book is similar-ish to Walk Two Moons. If I had to choose between the two, I would choose Walk Two Moons over this one, but they aren't exactly the same. This one is still a brilliant book, and I'll tell you about it. So this one follows Coyote Sunrise and her father. They had tragedy strike their family, and at least at the beginning it's kind of unclear when it happened, but since that tragedy struck, it affected both of them significantly, and her father made the decision to take them on the road. So they leave their hometown and they live on a school bus, sort of like a schoolie, if you guys have heard of a schoolie. And this book follows Coyote when she decides that she wants to travel back to their hometown because she hears about something that's going to happen and she wants to get back there. And she kind of has to trick her dad into getting there because he doesn't want to return. And anyway, it's about their journey back to their hometown and all of the people that they meet and sort of pick up on the bus along the way. And it's really good. It has that sort of middle grade feeling where everyone's just a little bit quirky, a little bit extra, like this quirky writing style, these quirky characters that sort of fill up these books that feel sort of bigger than life in a really, really good way. Not in like an annoying way or anything, but anyway. That describes this book a little bit. It also describes Walk Two Moons. Describes a lot of middle grade novels. Okay, we're going to be moving on to the next prompt now. I know these prompts, but I have to remind myself. A retelling of a fairy tale or a book with a fairy tale vibe. Alright, so I have a few for this. Alright, so I'm going to mention some straight fairy tales that I have read. Fairy tale retellings. The first is The Goose Girl by Shannon Hale. I have seen this book categorized as both middle grade and young adult. It's sort of one of those books that is kind of a crossover book, but I would still consider this a middle grade book. When I read it, I thought it was middle grade, and it's wonderful. So this is a retelling of the Hans Christian Andersen book, The Goose Girl. Grimm's Fairy Tale. Grimm's Fairy Tale, not Hans Christian Andersen. But it is such a good retelling. This book is wonderful. I've read this book twice. I read it again, probably my first year on BookTube, so back in 2016. I'm not sure I've mentioned it since then, but this book is really great. Someone is texting me. or sending me a message. I will get back to them later. Anyway, The Goose Girl. Yeah, it follows, oh my gosh, it doesn't have the description on the back, so I can't remember the name of the main character. It's really well done. Probably my favorite like straight retelling that I've ever read. There's also more books in the series, but I've never read them. I have one of them. I have the Anna Burning, who you meet in this book. Haven't read it yet. I would like to. I would like to. And then I think there's a third book in the series that I don't even own. All right, the next retelling is The House with Chicken Legs by Sophie Anderson. I don't know if I've ever talked about this book on here. Did I read this last middle grade March? I don't remember. Anyway, this book is a retelling of Baba Yaga, which is a Russian folktale. Baba Yaga is a witch who welcomes the souls of the deceased as they enter into the afterlife. That's kind of who Baba Yaga is in Russian folklore. This book follows Baba Yaga's granddaughter. Baba Yaga's granddaughter is named Marinka, and Baba Yaga is training Marinka to become a Yaga. But Marinka doesn't want to become a Yaga, and because she kind of thwarts her learning, and thus the adventure happens. I really enjoyed this book. It was very fun, great retelling, and I also really love this cover. I think I have one other Sophie Anderson book that's another retelling. Haven't read it yet though. The fifth and final prompt is a book set in the decade you were born. Because this prompt is very personal, depending on what decade you were born, Krista and Amanda and I have decided that we're going to each recommend at least one book from every decade from the 50s to the 2000 to 2010. If you need help other than that, a really, really great place to look are like children's awards lists. So like look at what books have won the Newbery Award in whatever decade you were born. There's all sorts of resources like that online. There's also some lists just in general. If you search like books written in the 80s or whatever. I just decided to do one book from each decade, starting with the 50s, and the book that I'm going to recommend is Skating Shoes by Noel Strutfield. Skating Shoes was written in 1955, I want to say. Was it 1955? No, 1951. I was wrong. 1951. So she might have written some of her books in the 40s. Anyway, I digress. All of her books follow young girls who are pursuing some sort of expertise in like an artistic sport. So we've got figure skating in this one. We've also got ballet shoes, dancing shoes, and then there's also theater shoes, which I also read when I was a kid. I have yet to read ballet shoes, but I own that one and I'd like to read it at some point. They're wonderful, and if you are a fan of the movie You've Got Mail, Kathleen Kelly mentions skating shoes and ballet shoes. She mentions Noel Strutfield at the end of the movie when she's sitting in Fox Books and lamenting the fact that basically people who are working there don't know Noel Strutfield because she's so wonderful. And she is. This is classic children's literature right here. So good. Really good. Love it. The book that I want to recommend you from the 1960s is not a book that I own. I'm shocked that I don't own this book. I read this book and loved it when I was a kid. And that's Harriet the Spy. If you haven't read Harriet the Spy, if you've never heard of Harriet the Spy, you've probably been living under a rock, but I don't know. Maybe you've never heard of it. Maybe you've never read it. If you haven't read it, you definitely should. It's so much fun. Another very classic mid-century kind of feeling book. This one is a little bit more adventurous. We follow Harriet, obviously, who wants to be a spy, obviously. And she stumbles into kind of an actual mystery that she then attempts to solve. And I haven't read it in years. I remember there's one scene when she's sitting in a dumbwaiter and she's listening in. I also know that when I was a kid, after I read this book, my friend Amelia and I decided that we too wanted to be spies, and so we would like hide in closets in our family's houses, respective houses, and like listen in on really boring conversations that like our siblings were having with their friends and stuff like that. So, you know, if you want some inspiration to become a sleuth, then read Harriet the Spy. That one would have been a great option last year for reading a mystery. But for this year, it works for a book written in the 60s, if that is the decade you were born in. A book written in the 70s, if you are a 70s baby, is Mandy by Julie Andrews. Julie Andrews Edwards, who we know as Julie Andrews of singing fame / Sound of Music / oh gosh, Sound of Music, Mary Poppins fame. She's also an author, and one of the books that she has written is called Mandy, and it's wonderful. It's about a little orphan girl named Mandy, obviously, who realizes that on the other side of the orphanage wall is a little abandoned cottage, and she decides to make this cottage her own. She basically rehabilitates it, and that's what this book is about. I reread this book a few years ago and really loved it. I read it first when I was a kid, loved it then as well. It's just a really sweet, joyous book. And I grew up loving books about orphans, so it hit that chord with me when I was young. I don't know why I had such a fascination with orphans. I would play orphans all the time too. I don't know, I was a weird kid. Okay, next is the 80s. Now, I am just going to put it out there that when researching books from each decade, the 80s is tough. I'm not sure why, but there just wasn't a plethora of really high quality children's literature being written in the 80s. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist. There were still some great books written in the 80s, but it just seems like there's a bit of a dearth of great books written in the 80s. But the one that I chose is Number the Stars by Lois Lowry. This is a World War II historical fiction middle grade novel. This follows Anne Marie Johansson in Copenhagen. I'm sorry, all of my international friends, my geography is terrible, but Copenhagen I think is in Denmark. So she and her family decide to take in Anne Marie's best friend who is Jewish, and her name is Ellen. So they take in Ellen and act as if Ellen is their daughter. That's basically all I remember about this book. It's been years and years and years since I read it. I think I read it as a child, and I have not read it since, although I do still own my hardcover copy that my mom put a library, like one of those plastic covers on, because that's what she does with all of her books. So this is left over from that when I was a kid. Yeah, I haven't read it since. I'd really love to reread it sometime. I do, however, remember loving this book. I also remember it being really sad, which, I really loved sad books when I was a kid too. Something about, sad books, they would bring up all sorts of emotions in me, and as a 9, I'm roiling with them, but I kind of stuff them down a lot, and sad books help me to bring them to the surface. Okay, all right, then we're moving on. Then we've got the 90s, so all you 90s babies. There are some great books written in the 90s. The one book on my shelf that I have, I don't know why this is like the only book on my shelf written in the 90s, but apparently it is, so this is the one I'm going to recommend. I'm not sure this is the one that I would choose if I had like all of my favorite books from the 90s to pick from, but it's the one on my shelf, so it's the one I'm going to show to you. And that's Maniac Magee by Jerry Spinelli. And I think this is the one on my shelf because I actually just read this a few years ago, and I really enjoyed it. Jerry Spinelli is a great author. This is about a little boy named Jeffrey who is an orphan, and because his family was in a tragic trolley accident. Since that tragedy, he has lived with his aunt and uncle, and then one day he decides to start running. Not running away from anything, just running. And, events in the town that he lives in begin to happen because he begins to run. He develops this sort of mythos around him and becomes known as Maniac Magee. That's where he gets the name, because of all the running that he does. And that's all I will say about this book. It's great. It won the Newbery Medal, so, it's got that gold sticker of approval. Finally, the book from the 2000s that I'm going to mention. This is probably the decade in which I have read the most books, other than like 90s, because I grew up in the 90s. The final book that I'm going to recommend, if I have anyone young enough, I probably do have a few people who were born in the 2000s, like the decade 2000 to 2010. This is probably the decade that I've read the most books from, and I had a really hard time choosing just one to recommend to you guys. I decided to choose one that I haven't recommended a lot on my channel, but is a really great book. and that's Al Capone Does My Shirts by Jennifer Choldenko. It's a Newbery Honor winner, and it takes place in the 1930s, and it follows Moose Flanagan and his family. His father is a prison guard on Alcatraz. So Moose befriends the warden's daughter named Piper. They get into a lot of adventures, and Moose also spends a lot of time looking out for his younger sister, I can't remember her name, Natalie, who has some sort of undiagnosed disability. I think if we were going to diagnose her today, she has maybe some form of severe autism. It's unnamed in the book because it was something that people didn't have any understanding of at the time that the book is set in. But this book is really, really great. There's, I think, 2 more books in the series. I haven't read them. I'm not sure I ever will, but I'm not sure why I wouldn't, because I really loved this first one a lot. It is so good. Yeah. So anyway, those are like the 18 or so books that I have to recommend you. Let me know down below. You guys, leave some recommendations. If you guys have other books from particular decades that you love, let people know in the comments below. Leave other recommendations that fit these prompts that I have not mentioned, because there are a ton, and I think that the comment section would be a really great place for people to get some more ideas about books they could read. So please, if you have books that you've read that fit these prompts, leave your suggestions in the comments below, and let me know if any of these sounded good to you as well. If you're going to add any of these to your TBR for the month of March. That is all that I have for you today. I hope that you guys are doing well. I hope that you guys are getting so pumped for middle grade March, and that you are getting your TBRs together, and that you're as excited as we are. Don't forget to like this video, comment, subscribe if you haven't already. I would love for you to stick around, and I'll talk to you all later. Bye!